Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Very excited that you're here for change management in the modern workplace with Dr. Orr. I'm Christy Kotek, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations and Career Development here at Roosevelt University. Thank you so much. We're excited to have such a good group here with us today. Just a couple reminders. Please, again, be sure just to keep your mic muted throughout the hour, just to create the best quality audio experience for everyone. Please do feel free to use the chat box. If you have comments or questions, Dr. Orr will be taking questions throughout the hour. So again, very excited to have you all here. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Deborah Orr, who is the Associate Professor of Organizational Leadership and Development here at Roosevelt University. I'm very excited that she took time out of her busy schedule to connect with all of us and share her expertise and learnings here with our community. So to share a little bit more about Dr. Orr, she has recently authored Team for Change, a Practitioner's Guide to Implementing Change in the Modern Workplace. And she will be sharing a lot of those methods and themes during today's webinar. She has also been published in a number of journals, and two healthcare books carry chapters that she authored. In November 2020, she received the Literati Award for Outstanding Paper on international. It's an international research award, which is a very just a very prestigious honor. She's also an active consulting, working with organizations both large and small, established and startup. She has served as an executive coach for entrepreneurs for Fortune 100 presidents and a member of the U.S. Congress. As an award-winning writer and an award-winning change management consultant, ongoing researcher in leadership, executive coach, organization development consultant, and frequent academic presenter, Dr. Orr is a scholar, practitioner, concentrating her efforts on bringing the newest academic research to life within the context of organizations. So she's not busy at all. So that's why I say we're so lucky that she has dedicated some time to share her expertise and her book with us today. So Dr. Orr, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Again, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much, Christy. And I especially want to thank all of my students, my current students and my former students who are here. I'm really gratified that you would take time out of your schedules to be here. I also want to thank all of my colleagues who I see who are here, both academic colleagues who are current and colleagues who I've worked with in the past who I can see popping in. So thanks so much. I really do appreciate it. It's nice to see friendly faces that you're familiar with. I normally like to do introductions during talks, but there's a big group here, and if we did that, we would spend all the time introducing ourselves. So we can't really do that. So I apologize for that. I will take a look at the list and send you all notes afterwards. And I'm just very grateful for your time and attention for being here. I tend to present in a very conversational way. So if you have questions about things that I'm talking about, please put them in the chat. Christy's going to monitor that. I'm not going to watch it too carefully because I want to pay attention to what I'm talking about. But I will stop periodically and ask for questions. And Christy's going to pop them up or comments, and we will definitely take care of that as we go. I'm going to pull up some slides that I've got so that we can start sharing. So we've got that going, slideshow. Let's see here. From the beginning, how about that? Everybody see that? Give me a thumbs up. All right, great. So the book is entitled Team for Change, A Practitioner's Guide to Implementing Change in the Modern Workplace. One of the quotes that I thought was really great to start out with is the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. And I thought that one was particularly great because it was by Albert Einstein, who happens to be a founding board member of Roosevelt University, for those of you who may or may not know that. Who's seen this slide before? Anybody seen this slide before? I saw this slide about 20 years ago as I began doing my consulting work as a young professional. And I love this slide. And I love this slide for a number of reasons, but mostly because it felt like it was a formula, right? It's a formula for success. How do I get there? How do I get there? And one of the things that I strove for was to be on that top line. How do I get to the top line? But what was troubling to me is that I would get to that top line, or I would feel like I was on that top line, and I was still having trouble. And that's when I really realized that this slide was sadly incomplete. This is a great slide still. I still love this slide because it gives you a lot of information, but it's a little bit incomplete, and it's a little of the impetus for why I started writing this book. And because there's something missing here, and that missing piece is really human beings. The book, so to be clear, is not a methods book. There are a lot of methods books out there. The lovely 600-page tome of Holman, Devane, and Katie, Change Management Handbook, dedicated to nothing but methods. Great book. This book is not that. This book is really very much about the human beings and how we work together. And quite frankly, it's the trickiest part of change, right? Because human beings are not particularly predictable. And that's where we get to this, that change can be a method, right? And we can plot it on a calendar, and it's neat, it's tidy. But transition is really about that individual shift in a single person's mind. Transition happens in our heads. And that idea comes from William Bridges' work, but it has nothing to do with our calendar. It has to do with ourselves. And so that's where I wanted to go. And it starts out with the idea of trust and risk. And trust is willing to be vulnerable about things and having that positive expectations about another person's intent. Risk is actually, willing to do that and being vulnerable about it. And our doubt when we're, I'm not so sure, I'm giving that the side eye. That's a measure of how much we're willing to trust another person in that process. And so we look at this, and this is where the rubber meets the road around trust. Trust is when there's consistency between the things that you say and the things that you do. We always hear, oh, there's a lack of trust in our organization. Oh, we lost trust. How do we rebuild trust? We rebuild trust when we rebuild consistency. And I looked this up a long time ago, and I thought, well, how do I build trust? I'm in this organization, they have a lack of trust. What do we do to build trust? That's really what we're lacking here, and how do we rebuild it? Right. So I found a beautiful resource from Frances Fry from Harvard University. And she had this brilliant little prescription for building trust. And she said there's 3 parts to building trust: and authenticity, empathy, and logic. And she said, and she has a great video on YouTube, and I would show it if we had time, but unfortunately we don't. So I would encourage you, if you want to see it, just Google her up. Fry is F-R-E-I. Frances, and beautiful little video about how to build trust. And she said that she would wear an Uber t-shirt until the employees of Uber regained all of their trust in their leadership. She might still be wearing this shirt, just saying. Anyway, so authenticity is really about, do you have that consistency? Are you being who you really are with the people that you're working with? Empathy, are you phoning it in? Are you being true? And then logic, does your narrative about what you're talking about make sense? And she made this cute little diagram of these 2 little ways in which we can put a narrative out there. One is that we make it interesting. Like when we read a story, we start and we kind of like wind down, and we eventually get to the point of it. And she said the way that we really should do our narrative is very bulleted, very bulleted narrative, very clear, 3 or 4 points, and you climb the ladder to the top and you're at your point. So you want to be very precise in how you make your logical argument. That builds trust. Don't create a long, winding road narrative. It doesn't help you. The other piece is to really understand what it means about people. How do we look at people? And this is really a significant part, that there are knowledge workers now, and knowledge workers make up a great portion of our workplace population these days. How we work, right? The ways in which we engage in work and the ways in which management manages people. Generational cohorts, and what does that mean? There's a great book that just came out from a University of Miami professor, Mcgregor, which really explores this concept. I think she calls it Gentelligence, is her book. And then intercultural differences. Our world is becoming increasingly global. And how do we engage intercultural differences in ways that are respectful and useful? And then, of course, group development. Groups develop in a rather predictable way. And do we understand how those things happen? So knowledge worker is a way in which people use their brain instead of their hands as their asset, right? We're doing non-routine problem solving and engaging the transformation of intellectual material rather than physical material. So that's a knowledge worker. And that's really where most people are working in corporate America these days, are knowledge workers. Knowledge workers also have a more profound investment in their profession. And so they really care about what happens in their workplace. And they want to be involved in what's happening in their workplace. And so if you don't involvement in the decision-making and invite their input into decision-making, let me speak correctly, you're gonna risk some disengagement. So you want to invite them into that conversation. And then shifting a little bit to how we work around theory X, Y, and Z. And this is starts out with Douglas Mcgregor back in the 60s. He wrote this fabulous book that's still one of the most influential books ever written in business management. It's called The Human Side of Enterprise. And he had two balancing theories, theory X and theory Y. And in theory X, he says that people don't want to work, that you have to force them to work. And you have to have a lot of rules, and you got to watch them. You got to make a lot of procedures. And if you don't do that, they're going to slack off first chance they get, right? On the opposite side of the spectrum, he says theory Y is that work is as natural as play to people. People want to work, that they want to have an impact, that they derive meaning and value in their lives from the kinds of contributions that they make in their workplace. And that you can see the orientation of your management as theory X and theory Y by the way that they approach the people they work with. And I think that that's pretty clear. You can see that almost immediately in any kind of interaction that you have with people in their workplace. And then there's a third theory that came out just fairly recently, I want to say late 90s. Weechie came out with the idea that once there is a strong alignment between the values fit of an organization and an individual person, people will do their utmost to contribute to their workplace environment. So Weechie says that theory Y work ethic is contingent upon a values fit. So that's the idea that we're thinking about how people work. And then we go down to generational cohorts, right? And we want to talk, I wanted to tell you a story. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot to tell you this story. So Douglas Mcgregor had a great little quote, and he said, the ingenuity of the average worker is sufficient to outwit any system of controls devised by management. Any system of control. Anybody can outwit any kind of little policies you make or any little rules you devise in order to get around any theory X things that you put in place. And in the book, I have a great little story about this because in fact it is true. And this was a great example of it. And I'm going to read you the story because I don't want to mess it up. And he said, in the job, this guy's a photographer. He says, in the job, we would shoot what we called line photos of different products that we were going to feature in the ads. The Time and Motion people, and this was actually quite some time ago, decided that it takes 15 minutes to shoot one line photo. In reality, I could shoot 10 or 15 of them in 15 minutes. But the consultants never thought about how the other aspects of the job required creative or even artistic work that takes a lot more time than shooting a line photo. So what we would do is when someone needed more time to work on something creative, someone else would buy them time by shooting a bunch of photos to cover their work. It was ridiculous because the company got billed for each line photo that we did. Their costs went up by 800%, and they went out of business within 2 or 3 years because they wanted to catch us slacking off. They just wanted to control how we did the work. They would have been a lot smarter to ask us about it. So talk about trying to outwit your company. Those guys sure did it, and it cost their company a lot. And then here's another quote, and this is from George Orwell. And he said, each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. And I think that we can see that in all the rhetoric that's going on with boomers, Gen X, millennials, Zoomers, and the like, right? Okay, boomer, and the slacking that we ascribe to millennials and the cynicism that we subscribe to Gen Xers, right? But what's interesting about this is that the research bears absolutely none of this out. The research says that there are not a lot of actual differences between generations, except the beliefs that we hold about them between ourselves. So the beliefs get in the way of how we work with one another and have implications about how people work together. So my belief about you and your generational cohort will impact our relationship a lot more than any difference that's actually there. So I think that that's absolutely fascinating. And then we have those intercultural differences. And if you know anything about the work of Geert Hofstede, you can know that there's things like uncertainty avoidance versus risk-taking and masculinity versus femininity. And that doesn't really mean men versus women. It really means the way in which cultures measure success. Individualism versus collectivism, what's important. Short-term orientation versus long-term orientation. So what are we focusing on in the long term or short term? Indulgence versus restraint. And then last but not least, we've got the group development, and that's Tuckman's model: forming, norming, storming, and performing. And what we see there is that in the forming section, we're really trying to figure out what we're doing in any given group that we're working in. In the storming section, we're trying to figure out our norms. How are we going to work? And then norms, we're setting them. And then performing, we're finally getting to the point where we can do some work together. They have added a little fifth category, actually, of adjourning. And sometimes they put in renorming if there's been people who rotate in and out of the team. But the point of that is that work is done by groups of people. And if you can't understand that group process, you can get really thrown off by the idea of storming, because it seems like, oh my God, we're fighting. Oh my God, we're fighting. It's about kind of clarifying how people are going to work together. And you shouldn't be too concerned about it because you're all trying to negotiate your roles together. Then there's the idea of really shared vision. And what we have to have with shared vision is a strong rationale about why we're doing something. What is this about and why should we care? It has to be vivid and compelling and make sense to people. There should be an aspect of learning to it. What are we getting from this? It should be persuasive and illuminate the idea. And it has to be widely agreed to be the right course of action. And people should be personally involved and engaged by it, right? The reality is that people won't change direction unless they understand where they're going. And you have to paint a picture of what's clear and compelling, and they have to believe in it, right? You're asking them. I like to think of shared vision, right? Imagine two giant pillars, 50 feet in the air, and you're standing on one. And there's another one about 3 feet away, also 50 feet in the air. And your boss says, I'd like for you, Christy, to jump from this pillar to that pillar. And it doesn't seem terribly scary. But if you miss, yeah, that's a little scary. You could fall and die, right? You want to have a good reason for why that pillar is better than this pillar, right? And that's what shared vision is about. Explain to me, why is that better than this, right? That is important. So I wanted to take a minute. Christy, are there any questions that we should address at this moment?
Dr. Orr, excuse me, we did have a couple people ask if you are comfortable with sharing these slides.
Oh, of course.
Okay, great. Well, then we can certainly in our post email with the this session is being recorded. We can send out the slides with the recording. We do have another question come in. How do you make vision vivid and compelling if you should communicate in short bullets to build trust?
Actually, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Shared vision is very connected to an idea called symbolic action, and I will talk about that in just a few minutes. So great question. Brilliant. So the next idea is about leadership and social networks and how they're essential to success. One of the things that I often hear, I teach leadership a lot, and one of the things that I hear about people, they confuse the idea of leadership with senior management or a position or a role that you fulfill in an organization. These are not the same things. We refer to people in those roles as leaders, but they are not necessarily so, right? Leadership is a verb. It's an influence process. It is an action. And so leadership sets the tone, right? It sets the tone. It provides the rationale for change. It creates those connections. It emphasizes that we have a shared vision for the future and where we're going and why it's necessary. Why should we jump from that pillar? Leadership also animates the values of the organization and influences the culture. And when we talk about culture, again, that's sort of a nebulous concept, but really culture comes down to how decisions are made in the organization, who makes them, and what process do we go through in how they are made. And so I can think of an organization that I used to work for a long time ago. They had a beautiful vision and mission statement and a value statement. And sometimes we have unstated values, right? We have values that we write on the wall, but we also have values that we have that are unstated. And part of their and so those are kind of like espoused values or, that are there, but not discussed. And I think about that organization. And one of those values was the idea of thrift. It underpinned pretty much everything that they did. There were, very flowery things that they did, but the idea that everything had to be done on the cheap was really important. And it was never stated, but it was always there. And it's really important that when we are driving change, that we be aware of those stated values, but we're also aware of those unstated values. So another aspect of what we need to do as leaders when we're driving change is that we construct the plan and we connect that plan to the mission of where the organization is going, but we also make the connections with the people of the organization and help them to see how those things are helping us get where we need to go. Now, this next slide is the most important one that I'm going to share with you in this entire presentation. So everybody get ready. Buckle up. You ready? I'm flipping the slide. The quality of communication during a change initiative is a primary factor of success. The better the communication plan, the more likely that employees will engage in the change process. So if you don't communicate well, you aren't going to get there. It's absolutely essential. It is the key. It affects everything. It is trust. It is commitment. It is involvement. It helps deal with resistance. It is the whole kit and caboodle in one thing. If you do nothing else well, do this. Okay? There you go. Here's some little things that happen in communication, and I'm not going to dive into all of these. But sometimes when we rely on a vacuum of communication to actually communicate, which is what happens a lot, is that we get some communication out there, and then we rely on people telling other people stuff in order to actually get the message out. What happens is that communication, only 20% of it actually reaches its target, and it gets morphed, right, as it goes around. And it's sharpened, it's condensed, it's assimilated, it's embellished, it's leveled. It gets changed as it goes around. So the more direct that communication can be, the better your message gets out there. And even when we talk to one another directly, unless there's a feedback loop going, and you say, Deb, yeah, I got it. What you said, it's crystal clear. There is a significant chance for error, right? There's sometimes I use words that you might not understand, and you use words that I might not understand. We can make errors. And that's why the more direct, the better. The more communication channels, the better. So written, verbal, video, and face-to-face. The more cues, the better. And then the other thing that we need to do is use a burning platform to explain why. Does anybody know why we use the term burning platform? Because there was actually at one point an actual burning platform. And it was the Piper Alpha oil rig in the North Sea of the Atlantic. What happened was that there was a bunch of people out on this oil rig in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and a terrible accident happened. It exploded. And people had to stand on the deck of this oil rig and decide whether or not they were going to stay on the deck of this burning oil rig or jump into the North Atlantic Sea, freezing water, also strewn with oil and on fire, and hope to live. Which way you going? You got to make a choice. And that's why the term burning platform is used, is because we have to make a decision about what we're going to do around change, right? You have to make a commitment. In the Piper oil rig, it's the people that jumped that lived. Anybody that stayed on deck did not make it. And so it's the urgency around the change and the need for a quick decision that that sometimes drives that decision. But one of the things that I think is really important about burning platforms is you can't manufacture them falsely. If you manufacture a burning platform in an unethical way, it creates resentment, right? People know, people can see through that, right? People aren't dumb. I'm not dumb, you're not dumb. You can see through that, right? It creates a lack of trust. People don't believe you if you cry wolf, right? So I have a whole chapter on trust, which we talked about at the beginning, integrity and ethics, and manufacturing an urgent emergency is clearly unethical. And so I, as a professor, as a writer, as a consultant, I urge you never to do that. You can outline your problem very clearly, but don't manufacture it. The next thing that I want you to do as you're running into your change problem is to do a force field analysis. And you're saying to me, what is a force field analysis? It's a way of looking at the things that are driving you towards change and the things that are holding you back from change. And you need to do that both as aspects of your culture and rational reasons for the change and against the change, right? So an example of a cultural enabler of change might be that your organization loves to learn, that people tend to, as a rule, embrace new ideas. As a barrier to change, it might be that people are suspect of strangers coming in and telling them to embrace new technology, but they will do it if an insider brings it in, right? A rational reason for change might be something like the software company that you're using will no longer be supporting your product, right? Microsoft is no longer supporting Windows 7. You got to move to a new platform. Can't do it, right? So that's a reason for change. A reason not to change is that you don't have the hardware to keep up with that, right? All of the laptops won't accept it. Won't accept Windows 10. What do? So those are cultural enablers and barriers to change, and reasons for change and reasons not to change. Do we have questions, Christy? I see my little light blinking.
A question just asking where your book can be purchased. I know it's on Amazon, but
you know, I'm sure it can be purchased other places, but that's where I always send people. The publisher is Emerald out of England, and I'm sure Emerald has a website, right? But I think it's all the same. I don't think it really matters. Amazon's probably the easiest place, but I think you could probably order it through any bookseller. If they've got a local place you like, they could probably get it for you too. Anything else? All right. Okay. Okay, moving on. So why would we do a force field analysis if it's something that's absolutely going to happen? We know it's going to happen. Senior leadership or senior managers in our organization have mandated we're doing this. It's a for sure thing. Why would we bother? Here's why you're going to bother. You're going to do it anyway. And you're going to do it because you need to be able to understand why people are not going to feel so good about it. That they have reasons they're holding on to things the old way. You want to know what's in their head. You want to think about what's in their head so that you can talk to them about what's in their head. You want to understand what cultural things are in their decision-making process so that you can help them deal with that decision-making process when it's time to deal with the change. And you also want to understand the reasons for the change so you can promote them, and you can use those cultural enablers, having trouble talking today. So you can use those cultural enablers of change as a lever to help you move that change forward. So the effort's not wasted. So this is about involvement, right? Involvement is different than commitment. Commitment's in your head, right? I'm committed. I like that. Involvement is saying, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to take action. So commitment is about a mindset, and involvement is about action, right? So when we're seeking commitment from someone, we're using persuasion, right? I'm going to persuade you. I'm going to say things that sound good and seem appealing, right? Gaining commitment is connected to your organization's communication strategy. And as we talked about earlier, if you have bad communication strategy, it's going to result in lower commitment. And if you don't have commitment, you're not going to get involvement. So the better your communication strategy, the better your results. And there are many strategies you can use to gain commitment. And I'm going to show you some of those right now. Look at all those strategies. Look, there's 8 right there. And in the book, I go into great detail about how you can use these and actually ways that you can write them up into various memos, activities, things that you can do. And these are actually research-supported ways of gaining commitment. So the first is active commitment. Do something that demonstrates your own commitment to the project. Are you saying people need to change to Windows 10? Do it first. You go, right? The other is reciprocity. So prior to the launch of change, do something to broadly reward and recognize people. Broadly, they're already good people. You're asking them to make a sacrifice. Change is hard. Recognize them in advance for doing it. Say, people are good. I'm going to recognize you for that. Labeling. You are going to, when you're talking with your employees about change, you are going to tell them and ascribe the qualities that you are looking for. And you're going to do this ethically and authentically. You're not going to make stuff up because that's bad. You're going to say, I know you guys are hardworking, smart, innovative people, and you can manage this. This is a challenge you are up for. And so you're going to tell them the things that you need from them that they already are, right? Because that is a meaningful way for people to feel powerful and empowered to do the things that they do. We all know the idea of loss aversion, right? Loss aversion is that people are more concerned about losing something they already have than the potential to gain something that they could get that's even more valuable in the future. So what we need to do is to avoid framing things as losses. I know you're going to lose your office, but eventually you're going to get more square footage for that. No, we don't want to talk about it like that. We want to talk about the idea that we're going to have a better flow of traffic. We are doing things that are going to be better for our customer or our student or our patient or our library patrons or whomever we're serving, right? We want to frame that not as loss, but as gain for some other aspect, right? We don't want to talk about it as loss. And then give good reasons, right? Sounds crazy, but people sometimes don't give reasons for change. Just do it. I never just do anything anybody tells me. I want a reason. So people are 48% more likely to follow through on requested behaviors if they are given a good reason for needing to do so. That's crazy, right? I'm not going to just do something because you tell me. I'm going to do it because you gave me a reason. Okay, similarity. People tend to trust people who are similar to themselves. So seek out commonalities among people. We all like dogs. Okay, so let's talk about dogs and how dogs can fit into this change. We can all bring our dogs to work on Fridays. Whatever it is, let's talk about things that we all have in common and how we can drive those things into our change effort to drive commitment. And that it sounds silly to bring unrelated things into a change effort, but we need to motivate people in these moments. And things that will do that are sometimes little and they are sometimes unrelated. But sometimes those are the things that give us life and happiness, right? I mean, right here is life and happiness for me. This mug has my kids and my husband on it, and it is full of hot coffee. It is all the things that matter in the world to me right here. And it has, my dog, right? It's outside the door. All the good things in the world are little things. And so find ways to bring those things in to this initiative, even if they're little tiny ways. Bring your kid to work day, wear jeans on Friday, it's silly sneaker day, whatever it is. Find ways that people can connect with each other through a difficult process and allow them that. There is no reason to be a curmudgeon during this time period, especially during change, but give people something. Give them something. There's no reason for that. Okay, and then disclose first. There are going to be downsides to this. There's no change that is pain-free, right? Changes are not pain-free. You don't want that pain discussed in the hallway after your meeting, because it looks like you're trying to sneak it past them if you don't disclose it. You need to disclose it first. You don't want to do it in a loss way, but you do need to put it forward and let people know who are going to be affected by it. If you don't disclose it, they're going to figure it out and they are going to talk about it. And it looks like you're trying to put something over on people if you don't bring it up first. So don't let that happen to you. Put it out there. And last but not least, social proofs. Cite examples of other people who have done this kind of change and done it well. It's also great if you bring that person there and let them talk about it. Like, let's say you're updating to Windows 10. Bring in somebody who just updated to Windows 10 and let them talk about how awesome that was and what really stunk about it, right? Let them really tell you how it was. And I'm just using Windows 10 as a stupid example, but you know what I'm saying. Let somebody else who has come through that process in a similar way tell their story for you.
Dr. Orr, we have a really great question that came in.
I would love to answer that.
How do you balance number 4 and 7?
Right. And that's the hard part. And it depends on what number 4 is and what number 7 is. There's a little bit more detail on that in the book, and it would depend very much on what exactly those items are. And that is a delicate process, and you want to think it through super careful and write it down, analyze it, write it down again. And I think what is very important there is social proofs and other aspects of this process to gain commitment. Are you doing other things? Are you just doing one thing? And definitely, I think the authenticity and the idea that you are bringing it forward yourself. You say, I understand that there are some things in here that are not necessarily fabulous for everybody, but we're going to make good in other areas. And so how are you going to do that? And it really does depend specifically on what that specific thing is. I'm sorry, that wasn't probably the best answer. If there's a specific question somebody specifically wants to answer, please, I'm happy to answer that offline.
Okay, one more question. Are all 8 commitment steps required, or can an organization just implement 3 to 4?
They could implement fewer or more depending on the nature of the change, for sure. Yeah. And there's a little, in the book I wrote, like how to do a little bit, almost like a formula really, in terms of how you would want to write it up, in terms of a process that you would want to go through, almost like a little checklist. And you can go through and say, have we done this? Have we done that? Have we done the other thing? And this is the order you might want to do it in. So yeah, you could probably, depending on how big it is, the change and how painful it is, would determine how many you'd want to do. Anything else? Should I move ahead?
Yep, no more questions right now.
Okay, so the next slide is about that sticky little topic, resistance. So change is never painful. Only resistance to change is painful, right? Here we go. One of the things that I have engaged as a practice is that resistance to change is all about protecting something. And so when people are resisting change, we have to rethink how we're talking to those people. People who are resisting change are protecting something. And we need to think about how they want to be involved rather than how they are trying to dig their heels in. What is it that they care about here? If they didn't care, they wouldn't be resisting, right? They are there They are saying the things they're saying and they're doing the things that they're doing because something matters. Something matters. And we need to know what that thing is. And it can be job security, it can be knowledge, it can be control or prestige or security. We need to understand how we can reassure them to the level that it is possible. Sometimes those things can't be protected. Let's be honest. You have to be authentic. Again, trust, paramount, foundational. But invite that conversation, right? When only the positive side of change is promoted to employees and downsides or problems are ignored, employees detect this inauthenticity. They know when they're being hoodwinked, and they will resist, because when people are not being told the full truth, they know it. So when you feel that resistance, you can invite that person into the conversation. And if you know you're being authentic, you have nothing to fear from that person. And in fact, they might be able to bring you greater clarity, better goals, better process. They might also, because they were a resistor, have greater social influence in the organization than you could ever have. So by embracing that resistor, you are doing a really, really smart thing. So do it. And not because it's just socially expedient, but because it's the right thing to do. So here's some math. And this is about goals. And again, about resistance, right? When we think about resistance, think about math. I'm not a math person. I could do math. I hate math. I will admit it. But when we think about resistance, the satisfaction with the status quo multiplied by the vision of the future and multiplied by the first steps toward that vision must be greater than resistance, or that change will not occur. Right? So dissatisfaction times vision times first steps have to be greater than resistance. And the same token, similarly, also math. Oh my God, what is this math? The pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of change, or change will also not occur, right? So there has to make some sense in this, right? There has to be some balance, right? In order to drive that equation forward. People will not just change. We are standing on that 50-foot pillar, and we're not taking the risk unless it makes mathematical sense to do so, because we're not dumb. Okay, so we talked a little bit about shared vision as a process. Remember, we talked about a little, somebody asked a great question earlier. This is the answer. Shared vision as a process is called symbolic action. We want to involve people in this process. And so we can do that with an activity. And that activity can be art-based, it can be an event, it can be something hands-on where we can touch it, where we can involve people. We want to have wide participation, and we want it to have meaning relative to the goal that we're trying to achieve about this change. So some sort of concrete, and this goes back all the way to John Dewey and constructivism around learning, right? This goes back to those very root ideas about how people engage abstract ideas in tangible ways. We want to take this very shared vision, very lofty abstract thing and bring it down into a way that we can see it and touch it and feel it and manipulate it. And I mean, in a way that we can move it in a very purposeful way. And so we want to paint a picture with words or actual paint, or we want to do something hands-on with that. and we want to participate in that, and we want it to be a group thing, and we want it to be involving. And there's any number of ways that you can do this, but this is what's great about this is that it's a marker. It says we have started. And it also says, this is where we're going. And I've seen this done in a number of like hospitals where they'll have like a big wall up on a hallway or something. And everybody will go by and just dip their hand in paint and slap it up on the wall. And that's it. That's all they did. But it's like, I'm part of this, my hand's on deck. And it's something that means something to people, is that I'm here and my hand is on it. And it can be that simple, or it can be something far more abstract. I've seen a giant mural that was painted in a factory in Norway that did a beautiful job around a metaphor for their manufacturing process. Very intricate, like hundreds of people participated. They had a fabulous artist actually do it. They went all out, right? Or you could just have people slap their hand on the wall. It just depends on what you want to do. But this is a great way to involve people, and people, it becomes really tangible to them. And it's a marker for when you're starting and what the change really means. And as we talked earlier, culture is a decision-making process. So it eats strategy for lunch, right? Everyone's heard that phrase, right? Culture eats strategy for lunch. It drives it all. So if you haven't thought about your culture, which in your force field analysis, you should have already done. But if you haven't, and you move ahead anyway, and you're working in direct opposition, you're going to find out today that it's not going to happen for you. So this is a problem for people. What we find out here is that people don't actively engage, right? There's silence, right? Silence is not information in change. Silence is a form of resistance. And so when we don't hear, yes, this is a great idea, yes, I'm on board, or I have questions, how I'm not so sure, silence is not affirmation. When we don't hear drivers toward change, we are hearing resistance. And so I'm saying, manage your culture. If you're a leader, manage that culture. And if you don't know where to start, because a lot of people don't, because it's really kind of complicated, right? Culture is like, it feels very abstract. Here's where you start. You start with Weisbord's 6-box model. And here's all of his interrogatories. Marv Weisbord, darn nice guy. I got to sit next to him at a meeting once. He was so cool. I felt like I was sitting next to a celebrity. He was awesome. But here's like the questions that he suggests we think about, and you can ask them to people in your workplace, or you can just like sit there and think about it as you're trying to formulate your strategy for how you're going to work this through, and plan for how you're going to leverage your culture toward the change you want to do. Okay? I'm running out of time here, so I'm trying to go a little, oh my God, I'm totally running out of time. I'm sorry. So Deming says the same thing. So this is how Deming would come at it. He'd come at it from the flank, and he'd say, if you don't know what you're doing, and you can't describe it in a process, you don't know what's up. And he would say, instead of Weisbord's way, this is how you should look at it. And here's his questions, right? And then other people would say, if you want people to be involved, you have to create a level of safety for them. And this is how you create safety for people. You want to have that inclusion safety, that learner safety, that contributor safety, that challenger safety. So people want to be involved, and they have to have certain levels in order to be able to participate at varying levels of engagement. Challenger safety being the highest level, where they feel like they can push back against your goals and feel safe doing so. Kurt Lewin comes out at the beginning of the 1940s and says, behavior is a function of the person and the environment. And I'm going to go further than that. I'm going to say that behavior is a function of the group and the environment. And that is true. So that is where we're extrapolating that idea from. We're saying that the group matters in change. And the environment is super important. And what I mean by that is when we're in teams and we're working on change, we want a thing called the max mix. This is a Dana Miller Tyson things. Kathy Dana Miller, fabulous consultant, died in 2003, I do believe. Wonderful woman. You should look her up. She's fabulous. But what that really means in terms of practicality is that you want a variety of people on your change management team. You want different functions, you want different years of service, you want different levels, you want different demographics, you want everybody. You want people with high levels of informal leadership, and you want formal leaders. You want people who are technical, you want people who are not technical, you want people who are very customer facing, and you want people who never see your customer. So last piece that I think is super important is about involvement. And involvement requires people to feel comfortable. And that requires positive interaction. Fred Homan's Human Group, 1950, he created the AIS cycle, and that says activity, how things we do, drives interactions with other people. Interactions with other people creates a feeling, and that feeling drives the next level of activity that we have. Barbara Fredrickson has come out, and I want to say 1998, 1999, with the broaden and build paradigm. And she said that negative emotions create convergent thought that narrows our thought action tendencies. That says that when we have negative feelings, we don't come up with very good ideas. And when we have positive feelings, we come up with lots of good ideas. This can be illustrated very easily with the idea of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Saber-toothed tiger appears in the mouth of the cave. We all freak out. We don't know what to do. We run, we freeze, we try and kill it, right? Those are pretty much what we do if we saw a saber-toothed tiger, right? When in reality, there's probably 100 things we could do. We come it down to those 3, right? Because that's what we do. We could throw food at it. There's all sorts of things we could do. But we narrow it down. In reality, we want to stay in that divergent thought area. Because if we drop that convergent thought over the top of that divergent thought, look how much more area there is, right? And that represents all the good ideas we're losing. And if we combine these 2 things, the AIS cycle and the broaden and build paradigm, you can see that positive interactions and positive emotions can create this tornado of great interactions and good ideas, or it can go down the drain really, really fast. And we don't want to go down the drain. We want a tornado of great ideas. And then we get to sustaining change. I'm going as fast as I can. I'm so sorry. Got lost in my own words. I apologize. 2 things here, data and renewing practices. Data is really important because it gives us hard evidence of what we are looking at, and renewing practices deals with the idea of more like softer skills and people who are more values-based in terms of how they look at change and what comes from it. So data people, we need to deal with them, and renewing people, we need to deal with them. So we're looking at hard data people, we want to have numbers. Soft data people, we want success stories, renewing and rededication practices, and relevance, right? Are we still doing things that we should be doing because they make sense and they're making a difference? Whew. Questions? Sorry.
Yes, no need to apologize. This is such great information, and as everyone's pointing out here, discussing a lot of gratitude, Dr. Orr, for such an informative hour. It was very thought-provoking. I know, right, it was just rich with so many gems. I have paper full of notes and taking pictures, so thank you so much for being willing to also share the deck. I think that would be great. I'm just scanning to see if there's any last-minute questions that came through. Just a lot of kudos to you.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so nice to see all the Eric. Good to see you. You bet.
So yes, thank you so much, Dr. Orr. Such fantastic information. So I look forward to sharing the recorded session with everyone so we can dive back in, right? There's so much, and I think I still need to like digest and process it all. It's great.
Pete, great to see you. And there are a ton of notes too that I did not actually convey. So you can feel free. And I'll put a link in there too to the book on Amazon. If you want it, great. If not, it is what it is.
It looks like you sold multiple copies during the presentation.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and I can add the link in the follow-up email too for anyone who's interested. Add the direct link.
Well, it's my first one, and it's in a very conversational way. It's like the way I talk, and it's if you read it, I hope you enjoy it. And if you don't read it, that's okay too. I wrote it for me.
Well, that's the best person to write it for, but
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You're wonderful. This hour was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And stay tuned. In the follow-up email, I'll also share some of the presentations that we have coming up in June that are also centered around leadership topics. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.